The copper mine claimed by Everett Cole. The telegram crackled between Catherine Pemberton's gloved fingers as she stood on the weathered platform of Millbrook Station, Arizona Territory. The desert wind whipped her burgundy traveling dress around her ankles, and she squinted against the relentless sun that seemed determined to penetrate every fiber of her being. "Miss Pemberton?" A deep voice rumbled behind her, causing her to turn sharply. The man who addressed her stood a head taller than most, his broad shoulders filling out a work-worn shirt that had seen better days. His dark hair curled slightly at the collar, and his eyes, the color of rich coffee, held an intensity that made her stomach flutter unexpectedly. A day's growth of beard shadowed his jaw, and his hands, she noticed, bore the calluses of honest labor. "I am Catherine Pemberton," she replied, lifting her chin with the poise her Boston finishing school had drilled into her. "And you are?" "Jake Morrison. I work the claim next to your uncle's property." He removed his hat, revealing more of those unruly dark curls. "I heard tell you were coming to settle his affairs." Catherine's fingers tightened on the telegram. Uncle Jeremiah's death had been sudden, leaving her his copper mine and the small cabin that came with it. Her parents had been horrified when she'd announced her intention to travel west and see the inheritance for herself, but at 26, she was considered quite on the shelf by Boston society standards, and the prospect of adventure had called to her restless spirit. "I suppose word travels quickly in a small town," she said, studying his weathered face. There was something about Jake Morrison that unsettled her, not in a fearful way, but in a manner that made her acutely aware of herself as a woman. "Millbrook's got maybe 200 souls on a good day. News tends to spread like wildfire." He gestured toward a buckboard wagon hitched to two sturdy horses. "I brought a wagon to take you to the property. The walk from town would be mighty unforgiving in those shoes." Catherine glanced down at her polished leather boots, then at the dusty, rutted road that stretched toward the rocky hills. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Morrison, but I wouldn't want to impose." "No imposition. Your uncle was a good man, helped me out when I first arrived. Least I can do is see his niece safely to her destination." As Jake loaded her trunk and valise into the wagon bed, Catherine found herself studying the play of muscles beneath his shirt. She'd never been so aware of a man's physical presence before. The gentlemen of her acquaintance in Boston were soft-handed and pale, more concerned with their cravats than with honest work. "You planning to stay long?" Jake asked as he helped her onto the wagon seat. His touch was brief but warm, sending an unexpected thrill through her. "I'm not certain," she admitted, settling her skirts. "I need to assess the property and determine what to do with it." Jake's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You thinking of selling?" "Perhaps. I know nothing of mining, Mr. Morrison. I'm a music teacher from Boston, hardly equipped to run a copper mine." "Music teacher." He seemed to consider this as he climbed up beside her and took the reins. "Can't say we've got much call for that particular skill out here." Catherine bristled at the dismissive tone. "I suppose you think all women from the East are helpless creatures who can't adapt to frontier life." Jake's eyes squinted at the corners as he glanced at her. "I think you might surprise yourself, Miss Pemberton. This country has a way of bringing out qualities in people they never knew they possessed." The wagon lurched forward, and Catherine gripped the seat as they began their journey into the desert landscape. Despite her bravado, she felt woefully unprepared for whatever lay ahead. The cabin that Uncle Jeremiah had called home was smaller than Catherine's music room back in Boston, but it was solidly built of pine logs and stone. A covered porch stretched across the front, offering shade from the relentless sun, and she could see the dark mouth of the mine entrance carved into the hillside behind the structure. "It's not much," Jake said as he helped her down from the wagon, "but it's sturdy. Your uncle built it to last." Catherine walked slowly around the property, her trained eye taking in details. The cabin was clean and well-maintained, with a small garden plot that had been recently tended. A creek ran nearby, providing fresh water, and the view of the surrounding mountains was breathtaking. "The mine's been producing steadily," Jake continued, unloading her belongings. "Your uncle had a contract with the smelter in Phoenix, brought in enough to live comfortably." "You seem to know a great deal about my uncle's business," Catherine observed, turning to face him. "Like I said, we were neighbors. Jeremiah was getting on in years. I helped him with the heavier work sometimes." Jake's expression grew serious. "There's something else you should know. There's been talk around town about your claim." "What kind of talk?" Some folks think a woman alone shouldn't be trying to work a mine. They figure you'll give up and sell cheap. His eyes met hers. There's one man in particular, Samuel Garrett, who's been sniffing around, making offers to buy out various claims in the area. Catherine's back stiffened. I see. And what do you think, Mr. Morrison? I think you have every right to make your own decisions about your property, but I also think you should know what you're up against. That evening, after Jake had departed with promises to check on her the following day, Catherine sat on the porch as the sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The desert was alive with sounds she'd never heard before. The distant call of a coyote, the rustle of small creatures in the brush, the sigh of wind through the canyon walls. She'd always prided herself on being practical and level-headed, but something about this wild, beautiful country stirred emotions in her that she'd kept carefully contained. And something about Jake Morrison made her pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with the altitude. The next morning brought Jake back to her door, along with a grizzled man he introduced as Pete Williams. Pete worked with your uncle for nigh on 5 years, Jake explained. He knows this mine better than anyone. Pete tipped his hat to Catherine. Miss Pemberton, sorry for your loss. Jeremiah was a good man and a fair employer. Thank you, Pete. I'm hoping you might be willing to teach me about the mining operation. Pete's weathered face creased in surprise. You want to learn the mining business? I do. I can't make informed decisions about the property if I don't understand what I'm dealing with. Over the following days, Pete patiently explained the intricacies of copper mining, while Jake helped with the physical aspects of the operation. Catherine found herself fascinated by the geological formations and the careful work required to extract the ore safely and efficiently. Your uncle kept meticulous records, Pete said, showing her the ledgers in the cabin's small office area. Every expense, every shipment, every payment. You can see the mine's been profitable these past 3 years. Catherine studied the neat columns of figures, her mind calculating possibilities. What would it take to expand the operation? More men, more equipment, Jake said from the doorway, and more capital. But it could be done. With the right investment, yes. Jake's expression was thoughtful. Why? You thinking of staying? Catherine looked out the window at the mine entrance, where Pete was already preparing for the day's work. I'm beginning to think I might be. That afternoon, as she worked in the small garden behind the cabin, Catherine heard the sound of approaching horses. She straightened, wiping her hands on her apron, and saw 3 men riding toward the property. The man in the lead was well dressed by local standards, his clothes expensive and his horse sleek. He dismounted with the confidence of someone accustomed to being in charge. Miss Pemberton, I presume? I'm Samuel Garrett. He removed his hat, revealing silver-streaked hair and pale blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. I've come to express my condolences on your uncle's passing and to discuss a business proposition. Catherine's instincts prickled with warning. What kind of proposition, Mr. Garrett? I'm prepared to make you a generous offer for your uncle's claim. More than generous, actually. Enough to set you up comfortably back east, where you belong. Where I belong? Catherine's voice cooled considerably. Now, don't take offense, Miss Pemberton. This is no country for a lady alone. Mining is dangerous work, and there are unsavory elements in these parts. A woman of your obvious refinement would be much happier in more civilized surroundings. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Garrett, but I'm not interested in selling at this time. Garrett's smile didn't reach his eyes. Perhaps you should consider my offer more carefully. I'd hate to see you make a decision you might regret. There was something in his tone that made Catherine's skin crawl, but she kept her voice steady. I'll keep that in mind. Good day, Mr. Garrett. After the men had ridden away, Catherine found herself shaking slightly. She was still standing in the garden when Jake appeared, his face grim. I saw Garrett's men heading this way, he said. What did he want? To buy the claim. He was quite insistent that a woman has no business trying to run a mine. Jake's jaw tightened. What did you tell him? That I wasn't interested in selling. Catherine met his eyes. Should I be worried about Mr. Garrett? Probably. He's been buying up claims all over the territory, and he doesn't take no for an answer easily. Jake moved closer, close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap and sunshine on his skin. But you won't be facing him alone. The intensity in his voice made her look up at him sharply. What do you mean? I mean, I'm not going anywhere, Catherine. Not if you don't want me to. The use of her given name sent warmth flooding through her. Jake. "I know this is complicated," he continued, his voice low and rough. "I know you're from a different world, and I know you have decisions to make. But I also know that I care about what happens to you." Catherine's breath caught. "You barely know me." "I know enough." His hand came up to touch her cheek gently. "I know you're brave enough to travel halfway across the country to claim an inheritance most women would have sold sight unseen. I know you're willing to get your hands dirty to learn something new. And I know that when you smile, it makes me want to be a better man." Before she could respond, he was kissing her, and Catherine discovered that all the romantic novels she'd read had failed to prepare her for the reality of Jake Morrison's lips on hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, then deeper as she responded, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I should apologize," Jake said, but his eyes held no regret. "Should you?" Catherine asked, surprised by her own boldness. "A gentleman would." "Then it's fortunate I'm not looking for a gentleman, Mr. Morrison." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Catherine threw herself into learning every aspect of the mining operation, from the actual extraction of ore to the business side of shipping and sales. Jake was a constant presence, helping with the heavy work and teaching her practical skills she'd never imagined needing. Their relationship deepened with each passing day. Jake would arrive each morning with coffee and fresh bread from the bakery in town, and they would sit on the porch discussing the day's plans. In the evenings, they would walk along the creek, talking about everything and nothing. Catherine discovered that Jake had been a lawyer in St. Louis before coming west after his wife's death from consumption. He'd bought his claim with the last of his savings, seeking solitude and hard work to heal his grief. "Why didn't you go back to practicing law?" Catherine asked one evening as they sat watching the stars emerge in the crystal-clear desert sky. "This country changes you," Jake said simply. "I found I preferred honest work to legal maneuvering. Out here, a man's word means something." "And what about a woman's word?" Jake turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Your word means everything to me, Catherine." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten with emotion. She was falling in love with this man, she realized, this strong, honorable man who treated her as an equal and believed in her capabilities. But their peaceful routine was shattered when Pete arrived at the cabin one morning with disturbing news. "Someone's been nosing around the mine at night," he reported. "I found footprints this morning that weren't there yesterday evening." Jake's expression darkened. "Any idea who?" "No, but I bet money it's connected to Garrett's interest in the property. He's been asking questions in town about production levels and ore quality." Catherine felt a chill of apprehension. What could he hope to accomplish by spying on the mine? "Information is power in the mining business," Jake explained. "If he knows exactly how much your claim is worth, he can either make you an offer you can't refuse or find ways to pressure you into selling." "What kind of pressure?" Jake and Pete exchanged glances. "Let's just say Garrett has a reputation for getting what he wants," Pete said carefully. That night, Catherine lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to every sound from outside. She'd grown to love this place, the rugged beauty of the landscape, the satisfaction of hard work, the sense of independence she'd never experienced in Boston. But more than that, she'd found something she'd never expected to find, a man who made her feel complete. She was almost asleep when she heard the unmistakable sound of horses approaching at speed. Grabbing her robe, she rushed to the window and peered out into the moonlit yard. 3 men sat their horses just beyond the porch, their faces obscured by the shadows of their hat brims. One of them dismounted and approached the cabin. "Miss Pemberton," he called out, "we need to talk." Catherine's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "It's the middle of the night. Whatever you have to say can wait until morning." "I'm afraid it can't. There's been an accident at your mine. A cave-in. You need to come with us now." Catherine's blood ran cold. Pete often worked late, and if there had been an accident, but something about the situation felt wrong. Why would they come for her instead of going directly to the doctor? "I'll be out in a moment," she called, then crept to the back of the cabin where she kept a loaded rifle Uncle Jeremiah had left behind. She'd never fired it, but she knew how it worked. As she made her way back to the front window, she saw movement in the shadows near the mine entrance. Someone was definitely there, but if there had been a cave-in, why weren't they working to clear it? The realization hit her like a physical blow. This was a trap. Catherine's mind raced as she tried to figure out what to do. She was alone, outnumbered. and the nearest neighbor was Jake, whose claim was a good 20-minute ride away. The men outside were growing impatient, and she knew she couldn't stall much longer. Then she heard it, the sound of a single horse approaching at a gallop. Hope flared in her chest as she recognized Jake's voice calling out, "Catherine, are you all right?" The men outside cursed, and she heard the sound of them mounting their horses quickly. "This isn't over, Miss Pemberton," one of them called out before they rode away into the darkness. Jake was off his horse and at her door within seconds, his face tight with concern. "What happened?" "I saw riders leaving as I approached." Catherine opened the door, still clutching the rifle. They claimed there was a cave-in at the mine, but something felt wrong about the whole situation. Jake's expression grew grim. "There's no cave-in. I can see the mine entrance from here, and there's no sign of any disturbance." He looked at her carefully. "Are you hurt?" "No, just shaken." Catherine set the rifle aside and realized she was trembling. "Jake, what if they come back?" "They won't. Not tonight." He pulled her into his arms, and she felt some of the tension leave her body. "But this settles it. You can't stay here alone anymore." "I won't be driven from my own property," Catherine said fiercely. "I'm not suggesting you should be. I'm suggesting you shouldn't face this alone." Jake's hands came up to frame her face. "Marry me, Catherine?" The words hung in the air between them, and Catherine's heart seemed to stop beating for a moment. "Jake, I know it's sudden and I know we haven't known each other long, but I love you. I've loved you since the day I met you on that train platform, looking like you were ready to take on the world." His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones. "I want to protect you, but more than that, I want to share my life with you." Catherine searched his face, seeing the sincerity there, the love that matched her own feelings. "Yes," she whispered. Jake's smile was brilliant in the moonlight. "Yes?" "Yes, I'll marry you. I love you too, Jake Morrison. I think I have since that first day." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Catherine felt as if she were finally home. The wedding took place a week later in the small church in Millbrook, with Pete serving as Jake's best man and Mrs. Henderson, the preacher's wife, standing up with Catherine. It was a simple ceremony, but Catherine had never felt more beautiful than she did in her grandmother's ivory silk dress, with wildflowers in her hair and Jake's eyes shining with love as he looked at her. After the ceremony, the newlyweds returned to the cabin that would now be their home. Jake had spent the week making improvements, adding a room to give them more space, installing better locks on the doors, and setting up a security system with Pete to ensure the mine was never left unguarded. "So, Mrs. Morrison," Jake said as they sat on the porch that evening, watching the sun set over the mountains, "what's our next step?" Catherine smiled at the sound of her new name. "I've been thinking about that. I want to expand the operation, but I also want to do something more." "Such as?" "I want to start a school. There are families moving into the area, and their children need education. I may not be able to use my music teaching skills in the mine, but I can certainly use them in a classroom." Jake's eyes lit up. "That's a wonderful idea. Where would you hold classes?" "I thought we might build a proper schoolhouse. The mine's profits could support it, and I could teach during the day while you and Pete handle the mining operations." "A schoolhouse," Jake mused. "I like it. And I think I know just the spot. There's a level area near the creek that would be perfect." Over the following months, their plans took shape. The mine continued to produce steadily, and Catherine proved to have a natural head for business. She renegotiated their contract with the smelter, securing better terms, and established relationships with suppliers that reduced their costs. The schoolhouse was completed by early spring, and Catherine found herself teaching 15 students ranging in age from 6 to 14. Jake had proved to be handy with construction, and Pete had revealed an unexpected talent for working with the children during their breaks. Samuel Garrett made no more direct attempts to intimidate them, but Catherine and Jake remained watchful. They'd heard rumors that he was having financial difficulties and was becoming increasingly desperate to acquire new properties. The confrontation came as they'd expected, but not in the way they'd anticipated. Catherine was teaching her afternoon class when Jake burst through the schoolhouse door, his face tight with anger. "Children, please continue with your reading assignment," Catherine said calmly, though her heart began to pound. "I need to speak with Mr. Morrison for a moment." Outside, Jake explained quickly. "Garrett's filed a legal challenge to your ownership of the mine. He's claiming that the original deed was fraudulent and that he has prior rights to the property. Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. Can he do that? He can try. The territorial court will have to decide. But in the meantime, he's obtained an injunction preventing any further mining operations until the matter is resolved. How long could that take? Months. Maybe longer. Jake's jaw was tight with frustration. Long enough to bankrupt us if we can't work the mine. Catherine's mind raced. Without income from the mine, they couldn't pay Pete's wages or maintain the equipment. Worse, they'd have to close the school, since the mine's profits were what allowed her to teach without charging tuition. There has to be something we can do, she said. There is. Jake's expression was grim. I'm going to Phoenix to hire a lawyer. Someone who knows territorial law and can fight this properly. I'm coming with you? Catherine, the school. Mrs. Henderson can manage the school for a few days. This is my fight too, Jake. The trip to Phoenix was grueling, but Catherine was determined to see this through. They found a lawyer named William Brennan who specialized in mining claims and territorial law. After reviewing the documents, he was cautiously optimistic. Garrett's case is built on some technical irregularities in the original surveying, Brennan explained, but I've seen these tactics before. He's hoping to tie things up in court long enough to force you to sell rather than fight. What do you recommend? Jake asked. We challenge his standing to file the suit in the first place. I've done some research on Mr. Garrett's activities, and it appears he may have some legal troubles of his own. The court hearing was scheduled for the following week. Catherine spent the time gathering every document related to Uncle Jeremiah's purchase of the claim, while Jake worked with Brennan to prepare their case. On the day of the hearing, Catherine sat in the small courtroom wearing her best dress and trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. Garrett sat at the opposing table with his lawyer, a slick-looking man from Tucson who seemed to regard the whole proceeding as beneath his notice. The hearing lasted most of the day. Garrett's lawyer presented his case with theatrical flair, claiming that the original survey markers had been moved and that his client had documentation proving prior rights to the property. When it was Brennan's turn, he methodically dismantled Garrett's arguments, producing evidence that the survey markers had never been moved and that Garrett's documentation was based on a claim that had been properly rejected by the Territorial Land Office years earlier. But the real bombshell came when Brennan presented evidence that Garrett had been involved in fraudulent activities and other mining disputes, activities that cast serious doubt on his credibility as a witness. The judge, a stern-faced man named Harrison, took only an hour to deliberate before returning with his decision. The court finds that Mr. Garrett has failed to prove his case, Judge Harrison announced. The injunction is hereby dissolved, and Mrs. Morrison's ownership of the property is confirmed. Furthermore, the court awards costs and damages to the defendants for the frivolous nature of this suit. Catherine felt Jake's hand squeeze hers as relief flooded through her. They'd won. Epilogue, a year later. Catherine stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching Jake and Pete work with the crew of 6 men they'd hired to help with the mine's increased production. The school was thriving, with 23 students now, and they'd just broken ground on a new church that would serve the growing community. In her arms, she held their 3-month-old son, James, who had his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. The baby gurgled happily as he watched the activity around the mine, and Catherine smiled as she thought about the future they were building together. Mrs. Morrison, one of her former students, now 16 and working part-time at the mine, approached the porch. Jake asked me to tell you that the new vein they found is even richer than expected. He says it looks like you'll be able to afford that new piano you wanted for the school. Catherine's smile widened. Thank you, Tommy. Tell him I'll be down to see it myself in a few minutes. As the boy ran off, Catherine looked out over the land that had become her home. A year ago, she'd been a spinster music teacher from Boston, resigned to a life of genteel poverty and quiet desperation. Now she was a wife, a mother, a teacher, and a businesswoman, living a life she could never have imagined. Jake appeared at the bottom of the porch steps, his work shirt dusty and his face smudged with dirt, but his smile bright as he looked at his wife and son. Come see what we've found, he called up to her. I think you're going to be very pleased with our little copper mine. Catherine laughed, adjusting the baby in her arms as she prepared to join her husband. I already am pleased, Jake Morrison, more than you can possibly imagine. As they walked toward the mine together, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd found love in the most unexpected place, with a man who saw her as an equal partner in all their endeavors. She'd discovered strengths she'd never known she possessed and built a life that was rich in all the ways that mattered. The Arizona Territory's sun beat down on them as they approached the mine entrance, and Catherine felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they would face them together, as they had from the very beginning. The copper mine had given them more than financial security, it had given them a foundation for a life built on love, mutual respect, and shared dreams. And that, Catherine thought as she watched her husband explain the new vein to their workers, was the most precious treasure of all.